Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. You could have spent your time anywhere else, but we're so delighted that you chose to be part of this afternoon. We have wonderful folks on our panel. And before we get into that, I just want to say that I myself spent 17 years at Educational Testing Service, and I have a great admiration for the work that is done by both Randy Weingarten, Becky Pringle, and Thomas Garcia. Before I start, I want to say that we're all concerned not just about the pandemic and the lives lost, but about the implications of what this is for our children and the lost ground for their educational trajectory. So this conversation is highly important. Let me begin with a quick introduction of the folks we'll be listening to today. Randy Weingarten is an American labor lawyer and educator. She's currently the president of American Federation of Teachers, a member of the AFL-CIO, and former president of UFT. New York Magazine called her one of the most influential people in the state of New York. On June 2009, Weingarten announced she would step down, and the Daily News described her by saying that she will be remembered as one of New York's most formidable union leaders, one with toughness, savvy, and smarts to spare. Becky Pringle is the president of NEA, National Education Association, the nation's largest labor union. And I just want to add here, I have great respect for unions. My father and siblings are all members of unions, and they do very important work. Becky had been a middle school science teacher for 31 years. She is a fierce social justice warrior and defender of educator rights. She's singularly focused on using her intellect and passion to unite the members of the largest labor union with the entire nation. Last but not least, we have Thomas Garcia. He's an aspiring writer, and he is completing his doctoral studies at UCLA. In 2013, he began a mentoring program with high school students, and that has flourished and has now become virtual classroom. And he has also started his own nonprofit in 2019. The name of that is CSLAP, and I will let him explain what that is. We're now going to ask our panel participants to make a short introduction of their organizations and what matters to them most in connection with our subject today. And we're going to start with Randy Weingarten. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And, I am so honored and delighted to be speaking with you today. And I am actually speaking with you from my office in Washington, where normally plastered on the office shelves is all of our kind of, what are we going to do this year and whatever. And I just decided today that I really wanted to see books, which is frankly what school is about too. It's frankly what pulling things together and pulling kids together is about, trying to kind of recreate the teaching and learning that we know we need to do in community. But we're a lot better off in terms of trying to get there and trying to have a more perfect union. A union, and you're going to hear me say this a lot, where everyone has the freedom to thrive. Now that we have Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and frankly, a fellow educator, Dr. Jill Biden, in the White House. And Becky and I were honored last week to have, to be at the White House last Thursday with Dr. Biden, talking about the importance of educators and education. And that was really, really important in terms of the symbol. But we know that the Biden administration is going to be more than symbolic. We know that with an administration that actually cares about people, that is competent, that is decent, and that is fair, and understands that bold action needs to happen to combat four intersecting crises that are really hurting America and hurting those who live in America. And that includes, obviously, the pandemic, the economic fallout, the fight against racism that we see from the last administration, where one of the first things they did was a Muslim ban, and then also the wall, the caging of children, whose parents wanted to get to America, to so many other things that show their racism, to obviously the crisis in democracy and in discerning truth from propaganda. But we need to help this administration fight those crises. But it has to be more than fighting those crises. We need to promise every American the freedom to thrive, fueled by opportunity and justice and a voice in our democracy. And of course, that means addressing these crises. But it also means creating the just and equitable conditions for economic and education opportunity. So what does that mean? Obviously, it means great public schools and a way to deal with affordable college, to deal with student debt. But it also means healthcare as a right and retirement security. It also means the right to vote and civil rights, the right to be free and have a welcoming and safe environment, whether it's the streets or schools, and not to fear that someone is about to deport you. And it also means an economy for all, including the ability to form a union. It's a big agenda to create a freedom to thrive, to create that kind of opportunity. But as Becky so often says about partnership with President Biden, Vice President Harris, Dr. Biden, this new Congress, regular folks have a real partner now who sees all Americans, regardless of who we are, how we worship, where we live, or who we love. And ultimately, though, that starts with education, and that starts with how to reopen our schools safely. And that is what the AFT has been trying to do since last April. But we need real guidance, and we need real resources, and we believe that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the Congress, if we can get this $1.9 trillion measure passed, are going to do that for us. We agree with Joe Biden's goal to reopen public schools as much as we can, K through 8 schools in the first 100 days, as long as they are safe. But we also have to deal with the effects of COVID, the social isolation, the lack of devices, the trauma that students and teachers and others have felt, the lack of truth, the disinformation, the feeling of insecurity. All of that is on our plates, and all of that we have to do together. So we have a lot of ideas about how to do that, how to help kids get their mojo back, how to have a second semester this summer. But we got to be together in trying to make sure that nobody is expendable, and that when we reopen schools for in-person instruction, which is so important, we do it with guidance, with testing, with making sure we keep people safe, and those who are at risk get accommodations, and ultimately get the vaccines as quickly as possible to as many people as possible. So I'm honored to be with you. There's so much more I want to talk about in terms of civics and science, but let me stop there.
Thank you, Ramsey. And now we're going to hear from Becky Pringle. Thank you, Becky.
Oh my, hello Yvette, hello USHLI. Can I just say, Yvette, when you talked about we wish we could be together, I automatically got this image of being with all of these incredible and brilliant young people last year. And you know what, when I asked them to raise their hands, if they were had already decided they were going to become a teacher or were considering it, I want to let you know, Yvette, that almost 90% of the audience raised their hands. And that is what's bringing this smile to my face. I truly hope that the participants at this year's conference will exceed the 90%. And we have aspiring educators who are joining us this afternoon. I have the honor and the privilege of joining you and lifting up my voice on behalf of the National Education Association our nation's largest union. We represent 3 million educators, not just teachers, but we represent bus drivers and paraprofessionals and nurses and counselors. We represent food service workers. We represent all of the people who teach and surround our students with the support, the love, and the nurturing they need so they can live into their brilliance. It is my honor to join you this afternoon. I will tell you that the educators of the NEA, and I know I can say this, Randy, on behalf of the educators of the AFT2, that we are fighting for racial and social justice in our schools. It is at the very core of the work we do. So I am so incredibly grateful to USHLI for our continuing partnership. It's so important. Dr. Andrade, we appreciate you. We appreciate your bold voice and your unwavering, unapologetic advocacy. And I want to extend a personal thank you to Tammy and Adrian and all of the USHLI staff for their dedicated and courageous leadership. You know, today our work is even more critical than it's ever been. The coronavirus pandemic, you heard Randy talking about not just the pandemic itself, but all of the crises that it spawned. We know that it fully exposed and it worsened those inequities. As educators, we knew those inequities existed, and not just in the education system, because we know that systemic racism, systemic inequities exist in all of the institutions throughout our society. And for our students, they compound in a way that really challenges their ability to actually aspire to reach their fullest potential. And so when we think about challenging systemic racism, that racism that exists in all of those social systems compounding to create that negative impact, we know we can't only talk about education. We have to talk about all of those systems. So we have to talk about healthcare, and we have to talk about economic justice, and we have to talk about houses. We have to talk about food insecurity. We have to talk about all of those things, because if our babies are hungry, they can't learn. So we are talking about working with all of the agencies throughout the Biden-Harris administration to ensure that our students get what they need when they need it. Because here's the thing. Our Black and Brown and Indigenous students and their families, and all of the students who live in chronically underserved communities, they have firsthand knowledge of the reality that this pandemic has had a disparate impact on them. And this is not new. We know that there's been a digital divide before they were learning virtually. We already were sounding that alarm bell around the homework gap, where over a quarter of our students and their families didn't have access to technology. We know that this pandemic has resulted in more families who are suffering through trauma and grief. We know that more of our families members have lost jobs, and our students are worried about where their next meal is going to come from. We know that more of our families have contracted COVID-19 or we have lost them. But we also know that with the Biden-Harris administration, an administration that I know the folks in this audience, our young Latino voters, helped to elect, that equity is at the core of the work that they have already laid out. You heard President Biden say that equity, racial equity and equality was one of his core priorities. And so we are so encouraged to work with him and with Vice President Harris and with Dr. Jill Biden to actually lift up their voices and partner with us to get our students what they need and deserve. And we know that as we face reopening, as we face the growing inequities, that we at the NEA, we see this as an opportunity for us as educators to lead a movement to reclaim public education as a common good, as the foundation of this democracy, and then to transform it into something it actually never was designed to be. And that is a racially and socially just and equitable system that actually prepares every student, everyone, to succeed in a diverse and independent world. You know, I have no doubt that as we work together in partnership, we will get that work done. Thank you so very much. And I am so thrilled to join my fellow panelists talking about these very, very important issues.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, both of you, for your remarks. It's so encouraging and so optimistic. I'm already excited. And now we turn to Thomas Garcia to tell us about himself and CSLAP. Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you, Yvette. And it is a true pleasure to be here today, to be on this panel with such esteemed leaders in education. And I hope that by representing the College Scholarship Leadership Access Program, I can show young people that it is possible to make a difference in your community today. CSLAP is a 501c3 nonprofit located in the Rio Grande Valley along the U.S.-Mexico border in South Texas. And our mission is to increase college enrollment and graduation rates in local high schools by conducting college readiness and college access lessons at the high schools and connecting students to near-peer mentors who are current college students or recent college graduates from the region. And the idea for CSLAP was born my freshman year of college in 2013, when I began to help my own high school friends apply to college. As a first-generation low-income student, I endured some of the systemic issues that many students in our region continue to endure, from poverty to the digital divide to lack of resources to overburdened schools. And I wanted to make sure that my friends didn't have to endure as many issues as I did. And so we got together and decided, what if we go back to our alma mater school district this summer and help students that we don't know? So for every summer during my undergraduate years, I returned home to far Texas, and I hosted a series of events to help seniors across the school district go to and through college. And my first job after Princeton was to work as a high school teacher at my alma mater, spearheading an effort to make CSLAP an academic year course, creating the curricula, and handing it off to the district for expansion. And now we are a nonprofit organization partnering with local school districts, furthering our mission of making sure that everybody in the Valley can be access ready for college. And access is our key term here. As long as someone has access, and that includes the facts, the resources, the mentorship, we believe all students can be college material. And it all started with that one question when I was a college freshman. What can I do to the community now? And the COVID-19 pandemic has only increased the need and the urgency of college students returning home to help uplift their community. In regard to our services, we do everything from the financial aid to the nitty-gritty aspects of the college application process, but there's one that stands out as universal that I believe anyone can get on and help their high schools with, which is the near-peer mentorship. If you're a college student or a recent college graduate or a young person who wants to uplift their community, it is not too late and it is not too early to say, what can I do today to make a difference for young people? Everyone was in that young person's shoes at one point. What can we do to band together to uplift them even higher, to make sure they go even further? One example of that here during the pandemic, although I have been jumping into virtual classrooms nowadays, is being that mentor for students who otherwise don't have a role model in their life, for someone who went off to go to college, or someone who went off to get a career, or someone they just simply need to speak to who is not a teacher or a counselor. A mentor is an in-between role that we've discovered works very, very well in not only accessing the students and getting their time and attention during these very dire times, but inspiring them to do better and to be able to feel seen and heard, which is such a crucial issue now during COVID-19. And one thing I'd like to end on in my introduction is to state that implementing near-peer mentorship programs in schools nationwide, whether it's in underserved minority regions like the Rio Grande Valley or in rural America, would solve so many more issues than simply college enrollment and college completion. It would allow social capital to flow back into the community and reduce brain drain. I'm a huge proponent of letting the young people lead the way, and I hope CSLAP can serve as a model for other nonprofits, for other K through 12 schools and other community colleges and universities across the country to not only do the short-term goal of getting our communities educated and getting them jobs, but in the long term of uplifting our communities and helping us tie back together stronger.
Thank you, Thomas. That's very inspirational. And I'm sure our audience enjoys listening to how they can contribute, because we have wonderful people in our audience that could be doing this work. So thanks for sharing that. So let's get started with our conversation, and we're just going to have fun with this. And it's wonderful to hear your enthusiasm. So I'm going to start with Randy. For years, we've reported on the disparities. My organization in particular, ETS, has always done these achievement gap reports. And those gaps persist. And as all of you have referenced, we know that Brown and Black children have had difficulty keeping up. Tell us about what's going to happen given what's gone on this year. Are we going to lose a year of progress? How are we going to respond to the concerns, and what help do you think you need from local, state, and the national levels? Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I'm really glad. Can you hear me? I'm really glad about that question. And I'm really glad about the framing that you heard Becky say, which is that we're in a situation where the accountability systems frame things in a lose-lose situation, as opposed to we have an opportunity gap and we need to address it. And we have kids, kids are born with optimism and with resiliency and all sorts of things. We have to give them the opportunity for them to thrive. And what we have done in this country is that we have basically given people opportunity based upon race and class. If you're wealthy, you have more opportunities. If you're white, you have more opportunities. Not always, but in the main. And what you're seeing with the pandemic is you see the exacerbation of the inequities. 30 million kids got fed in schools every single day before the pandemic. What is happening in terms of food insecurity right now? 16 million kids still do not have access to internet or to the kind of high-speed internet or machines or devices that they need. And then you have, and you see that's part of the dilemma in terms of how to reopen. School systems, private schools have been able to hire and deal with having, testing and figuring out how to reopen and having the space and having the masks. And in some of the public school systems, like in Philly, for example, you can't even open windows in a school or have soap when you need to actually have hand washing for kids routinely. So ultimately, this is an opportunity right now, and that's why I think that the kind of funding and resources for state and local governments and for schools that President Biden is trying to get to our schools is so important, because it is the opportunity to create opportunity and really start focusing on kids who have had the least first and foremost. So yes, do we have to deal with all of the effects of COVID? Of course, the social effects, the emotional effects, the academic effects. But first and foremost, we got to help kids get their mojo back. We have to help make sure that they feel safe and welcome. We have to plan a summer of enrichment and a summer of kids feeling like they have conquered COVID. And so those are the kind of resources that we need right now, as opposed to looking at it as what happened, how much have we lost? We have to look at it as we just went through a pandemic. We're still in the middle of it. how do we help kids recover from that pandemic? How do we help families recover? And what are the resources that we need to do that, starting with social, emotional, and academic, not just this school year, but this summer?
Yeah, I hear you and I agree. And I think that the parents are going to be extraordinarily concerned about what's going to happen with my kid, because as it is, our Black and Latino children are already disadvantaged. So we're all very concerned about what's going to happen. Do they lose a year? So I know we'll get more into it as we talk about it. Becky, I have a question for you. What are the central concerns and demands of your membership given the pandemic, and how do you plan to support them while ensuring the education of our children is not irreparably interrupted? And by all means, jump in on any item you'd like to.
So Yvette, the answer to that question is squarely rooted in the answer to the question that Randy just talked about. And the reason I say that is because, we both have always said, both of our organizations have always said that our students' learning conditions are our educators' working conditions. They're inextricable. And so when we talk about safety for educators, we are talking about safety for everyone. We're talking about students. We're talking about all of the people who work in our schools. And not just that, because we know with this pandemic, and especially its disparate impact on Black and Brown and Indigenous communities, that we also have to talk about our students' families. We have many cases where students are going home and transmitting the virus to their families, particularly in our Black and Brown and Indigenous communities where we have multi-generational families who are living together. So we have to talk about all of that together. So we first and foremost need to address the issues of safety. We've been talking about this, Yvette, since April. We have been demanding that Congress act. The House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act in May, and we've been waiting for the funding so that all of our schools had what they needed so they could reopen safely. And we've been saying the same things. We need PPE, and we need to be able to socially distance, and we need to make sure the infection rates are down. We need to make sure that we have the cleaning supplies to clean the classrooms and work sites. We need to have the ability to test and to trace. All of those same things, the same things the CDC has been saying, the same things Dr. Fauci has been saying, and the same things that President Biden has now talked about. So that's the first thing. We have to think about safety. And then we have to think about it in the context of what I talked about earlier. We can't just reopen our schools in the manner that we have been engaged in teaching and learning all of these years. We have to think about equity, and we've got to think about not only the urgency right now, but what are we going to change in the systems going into the future? How are we going to change the fundamental education funding system so it is equitable, so we can get at those opportunity and access gaps that Randy was talking about? And we have to do that now. We have to talk about academics and social and emotional learning. We have to make sure that our teachers and other educators and our parents are prepared to deal with and practice trauma-informed instruction. And how can we do that? We know, Yvette, that takes more resources. We need more people, healthcare professionals, and educators. I don't know if you know this, but we had almost 1 million of our educators laid off over the summer and the fall. That is something we must address. And that is what we believe the $1.9 trillion that President Biden is proposing, 30 billion of which it is directed directly at education. We know we can do better by our students. And we also know that we have to invest in them. And we also know that we must deal with the inequities that these compounding systems have had on our students. So in addressing the needs of our members, Yvette, we are addressing the needs of our students and their families.
Thank you. And I resonate with everything that you've said and with what Randy's comments and talking about the inequity. The Princeton High School in New Jersey has so many resources. It looks like a rich university. And 7 miles away in Trenton, our children don't have books, don't have computers. Right. And so this is an old problem that is now so incredibly exacerbated by the conditions that we're living in. So I really appreciate the direction that you and Randy are taking on this. Okay, Thomas, so tell us how you've been affected, how you had to pivot, whether the need for your services went up, went down. Tell us how it impacted your organization. Thank you.
Yes, the demand for services has increased, and the urgency of how we get the help to families has expanded. And one of the benefits of transitioning from the classroom within a school system now to a nonprofit outside the school system is that we get to now serve as that third party that connects community groups, entities, nonprofits to any school system we happen to serve. So if a school district's family engagement was already weak before the pandemic, it only got even weaker afterward. The digital divide has always been an issue in the Rio Grande Valley, but it has been exposed and a spotlight has been put on it because of the systemic failures of being able to get low-income families, and especially families who inhabit colonias, low-income, primarily Spanish-speaking neighborhoods along the border, access to basic needs. And technology is not even at the top of those needs. It's infrastructure, it's sewage, it's lighting. But when you ask a family to log on to a classroom on the internet so they can listen to a teacher, it's just not on the hierarchy of needs. And so when we talk about college access, it can seem like a far off goal if we don't yet address the underlying concerns that so many families have. So we've expanded to address those needs. We've been able to connect families that otherwise would have been invisible and overlooked because of systemic barriers, including the digital divide, but also prior lack of outreach from the schools to these school administrators, to the teachers. Because we get to bring college students and recent graduates in, they get to utilize their networks on the ground to get the community in. So even before the pandemic, our goal was bring the community in the classroom. Now we're just trying to go through the hoops and hurdles of making that happen virtually. And in many cases, bringing the school to the community virtually, making sure that the counselors and teachers and parents can all connect to make sure the short-term needs are addressed as aware as the long term. So our services have expanded to mirror, get the application in, to now, let's make these long-lasting relationships happen. And I hope that can last even beyond the pandemic, that now the proliferation of technology and slow, steady rise of Wi-Fi access in my community can facilitate stronger connections. So parent engagement is always going to be cause number one from the schools, that the education doesn't just end in the classroom, but it expands beyond. And I hope community groups like CSLAP and local nonprofits we partner with can continue being part of that conversation to help the teachers do their job and to help the counselors with their overburdened schedules. We're here to help out and to make that things can be facilitated so we can uplift our community.
So we've all alluded to the new administration, the new leadership, and what is possible. So if you could have the leadership do one or two things that you think would most impact the solution for these problems, what would they be? What would you have them? And this is for all of you. We're going to start with Randy again. What are the two things that you want the administration to do to get us constructively to where we need to be? If you were able to do that, what would that be? Where do we begin?
So look, right now I am a pragmatic progressive. So there's the values and there's the actions. And the actions right now are, we need to lift up for thousands of school districts, parents, and educators some really good practice so that people see what is possible. And they see, they touch it, they feel it. And so we have to actually have the funding and the kind of clearinghouse to lift this up so people see that it is possible in the middle of a pandemic and as we get out of it to help meet the needs of all kids, particularly our, particularly our kids who are disproportionately Black, Brown, and Indigenous. And so that's what we have, one of the reasons that I think that Joe Biden picked Miguel Cardona is because he's an educator with experience on how to do these things. And if we have real teacher, administrator working together, we can do plans for a summer semester. We can do things like have community schools where we wrap services around schools to meet the needs of all kids. We can create apprenticeship and other programs with a real deep dive into, frankly, science and social studies, which I think, given the democracy and pandemic, we know that these are the fields of the future. So I think what the administration has to do is it is the kind of boots helping us with the guidance and the support, not just in terms of reopening schools, but addressing the kinds of needs that people have and our kids have, having a clearinghouse to show examples of what works and be able to access that. And then all of us have imagination and hope, but you see examples that are sustainable and replicable.
Thank you. So I hear you saying we need more funding and we need to be more innovative and we need to perhaps do something in the summer and admit that schools do so much more than just educate our children. They provide for other resources. Becky,
right,
what
but
would
I'm
you
actually
say?
saying more. I'm actually saying more than that. I'm sorry. I'm saying
That's
that
okay.
People have to see it, feel it, touch it, and then adopt it for themselves. Often, we just make all of it up as we go along. And that clearinghouse of good practice, which medicine has and other places have, we have to have that as well.
I agree. Becky, you want to weigh in?
Yes. And, the very first thing that this administration has to do is they must get control of this virus. That's the most important thing. Get control of this virus. They are working hard to do just that with a call for additional funding. And they, even as they stepped into their position and realized the chaos that the former administration left them, they still rolled up their sleeves and they got to work. So they're working on a vaccination program. That we supported our frontline workers and our most vulnerable populations having those vaccinations first. And then, of course, our educators, all of them, our teachers and support staff, all of them, so that we could reopen our schools safely. And we have to make sure that we have a vaccination program that is also rooted in equity, so that there is an equitable distribution. And I bet this, our Black and Brown communities and our Indigenous communities too, they're not necessarily trustful of a vaccine for good cause, because they historically have endured misuse and deaths because of experimentation. And so we have to overcome that hesitancy to take the vaccine. And we have to make sure we're going where they are. We've got to address all of those inequities so that our society can get back to being in person, whether it's our schools or whether it's our communities, our businesses, all of that. So we can get control of the virus and our economics as well. And then I want to say this. I said this a little bit more earlier, but this is so important. One of the asks that we made of the Biden-Harris administration is that they figured out how we could have a partnership throughout the entire government, throughout our organizations like you and like us, so that we could finally step up to our shared responsibility. NEA and AFT, Randy and I actually issued a call to action about a year and a half ago to establish what we called a labor management collaboration partnership or program. And we involved the administrators and parents and the school boards because we knew it was our shared responsibility to do better for our students, that we had to do that together. And the only way that we could actually establish a partnership, a collaboration that was sustained is that we had to develop the processes, systems, and structures to actually grow it and sustain it. And so one of our asks of the Biden and Harris administration is that they think about that. And so that they could actually build that among and between the agencies in the department, because all of those agencies impact our students, from HUD to HHS to, of course, the Department of Education to DOJ. All of them impact whether or not our students have what they need when they need it. So that would be the second thing that I would encourage the administration to continue to build, so that we can be worthy of our students.
Thank you, Becky. So, Thomas, I'm going to change things up a little bit because Becky triggered something really important about the partnerships. So can you say something about your partnership with a business colleague and how you made this come to be and how folks can take advantage of it to teach their own children about advocacy and self-agency? Because I think it's a perfect segue to Becky's comments.
Yes, and one example of one of the many projects we do here at CSLAP is trying to reach students where they're at. And a mentor and colleague of mine named Matt Eventoff, who is my mentor and public speaking coach, inspired in me back in 2016 this idea to publish a children's picture book so we can reach students with the crucial idea that you can stand up and speak and use your voice. The big idea is empowerment. So we published a children's picture book that is free on the internet, Speak With Style Books. And our goal is to get this book in as many students' hands as possible. And this relates to this idea of the digital divide, because the resource is free, but it's on the internet. And so when people purchase the book on Amazon, we get the proceeds and we get to get physical books and give it out to the communities. One example is I partner with a local nonprofit that works with Colonia low-income neighborhoods in the Rio Grande Valley, and we're donating books to them so the families can have books at home to read to their children, resources otherwise they wouldn't have. And like I said earlier, access is key. And so if I had to address the earlier question of what we can do now legislatively and at the federal level, President Biden's FCC can use emergency funding to expand the E-rate program, emergency powers to get federal funding for communities and students who need Wi-Fi hotspots and technology. Hypothetically, if my community had access to Wi-Fi and technology, they could take advantage of this resource of getting the book for free, getting up-to-date information on COVID-19 for free, registering for the vaccine in a timely manner. Of course, accessing virtual classrooms and receiving our mentorship one-on-one. So it addresses this deeper issue of, yes, there are resources out there, but how do you actually get to them? And access is important, but how do you actually create access and distribute it equitably throughout the community? And a second point related to education directly is the deferment gap is a serious issue that I'm seeing with high school seniors and the current college students I'm working with. Many students are concerned whether they want to go back to college or even enroll in college in the first place. So I do support legislative action on doubling Pell Grants, making college more accessible. I think it was a great move recently to simplify the FAFSA and other higher ed adjustments. Simple things like this seem surface level, but they actually make huge rippling effects in communities like mine. So we can motivate students to at least apply and enroll in college. And then community groups, teachers, counselors, and other local mentors can help the student from May to September, their freshman year of college, and making sure they get through college.
Phenomenal. You have all been exceptional panelists, and I just want to say to the audience, I hope that you're inspired. I hope you see yourself as part of the solution, because you are. And I absolutely agree with the notion that we cannot continue to allocate resources to our schools using zip codes. There must be more social justice and equity in the way we take care of our children. But I hope you in the audience will be encouraged and inspired by these very fine panelists and by the solutions that are possible with your engagement. Thank you so much, each of you, for your time. It's been fantastic to be your moderator. Have a great afternoon.